He settles into his favorite recliner in his Carmel Highlands retreat, the fog rolling in over the Pacific as dusk deepens. Clint Eastwood, at 95, leans forward and finally speaks up about Robert Redford, the only man in Hollywood who ever saw past Eastwood's stoic facade and compelled him to admit something he'd kept buried for decades. Their stories first crossed in the mid-1960s, long before Eastwood carved his grim silhouette into spaghetti westerns or Redford became the Sundance Kid. But it was a single evening backstage at a 1972 premiere that changed everything. Eastwood remembers the moment like a wound that never quite healed. Redford, tall and lit by camera flashes, leaning in and saying, "You know, Clint, your quiet can be louder than any gunshot." Eastwood bristled, his jaw clenching at the implication that vulnerability might live behind those steely eyes. But Redford saw it, and that sight unsettled Eastwood in a way no director's call ever had. A few years later, during the filming of The Outlaw Josie Wales, Eastwood first felt Redford's influence in a more subtle form. He was directing the climactic showdown in a redwood grove when the crew paused for lunch. Redford, filming a cameo for a friend's Western tribute, strolled onto the set and quietly observed. When Eastwood called, "Action!" Against the afternoon sun, Redford stepped forward, raising an eyebrow so powerfully that Eastwood's bullet-proof persona wavered. In that fraction of a second, Redford's look conveyed confusion, regret, longing, none scripted, all raw. Eastwood later admitted that for the first time he heard the echo of human pain in his own scenes, and he realized he owed a debt to the man who could make him crack like porcelain. Their professional paths converged most memorably in 1995 on the bridges of Madison County. Eastwood, then 55, was directing Meryl Streep and Redford in an Edward Hopper-lit Iowa, and he found himself scripting moments for Robert he could not write for himself. Redford's portrayal of photographer Robert Kincaid carried a shattering blend of regret and hope that hung between the lines of every take. Eastwood recalls one evening, the last shot of the day, when Redford pressed his hand to a single-pane window and whispered a half-line about lost love. Eastwood, behind the camera, felt tears sting his own eyes. He walked onto the set and told Redford, "You were the only one who could do that to me, and I don't hate you for it." Redford turned, eyes soft. "That was the point," he said, "to see what we both carried inside." Off camera, their friendship was a careful dance. Redford encouraged Eastwood to speak about politics in public, an arena Eastwood had long avoided. By sending him a battered book of Jefferson quotes and a note that read, "Words can be bullets too," Eastwood read them at dawn on the back porch of his Sierra Mountain retreat and drafted his first op-ed in decades. He mailed it unsigned, but the raw conviction echoed Redford's own willingness to stand by his convictions. When the paper ran the piece, critics noted it sounded eerily like the man behind the Redford name. An earnest, resonant voice nobody knew he possessed until Redford dared him to use it. Their final collaboration came in 2006 when Eastwood directed the closing concert for the Sundance Institute's 25th anniversary. He invited Redford to introduce a lineup of young Western musicians. On the stage framed by aspen leaves and fading light, Eastwood watched Redford deliver a few heartfelt sentences about art's power to heal wounds. As applause swelled, Eastwood stepped forward and murmured, "That was the only introduction I ever needed." Behind them, the crowd's ovation shimmered like distant train whistles, carrying echoes of a friendship that began in sparks of rivalry but matured in mutual respect. Tonight, Eastwood holds a sheaf of letters Redford sent him over the years, ink-blotted pages filled with observations, gentle prods, and occasional challenges to break free from the man he'd become on screen. He reads one ink-smudged line. "Sometimes your silence sings louder than a choir." At 95, Clint Eastwood finally confesses that the man who could press him to uncover his own heart was Robert Redford. Not Newman, not Peck, but Redford. Because when the cameras and applause faded, it was Redford's quiet faith in Eastwood's buried truth that taught him the finest performance lies in the courage to speak the unscripted moment. That winter of 1975, when I was editing The Outlaw Josie Wales, Robert Redford surprised me by dropping by the cutting room at Universal Studios. He walked in quietly, carrying a cup of coffee and a leather notebook. The editors and assistants faded into the background, leaving just the two of us before a stack of rough reels. Without preamble, Redford flipped open the notebook and pointed at a single line he'd scribbled. "Let the camera breathe," he said. "Clint, don't cover every pause with a cut. Give the dead air weight." I bristled. Breathing room felt like wasted seconds when my instincts screamed action. Yet I followed his advice in the next sequence, slowing the cross, cut between flashback and present. The result was startling. The death of Wales's family felt less like exposition and more like a jagged wound. After that, every time I sat at the editing console, I saw Robert's notebook beside me, urging me to trust silence as much as motion. In 1980, while filming Any Which Way You Can, I found myself grappling with my own stubbornness in front of the camera. I was directing and starring, and the ranch brawl scene under the redwood trees defied choreography. A single take left my knuckles bruised and my temper raw. That afternoon, Redford rode up on horseback unannounced and offered me a leather glove and a flask of whiskey. He said quietly, "Toughness is overrated. Show them the man who bleeds when he's hit. Then you'll have cinema." I pocketed the flask and slipped on the glove, filming the next take with a slower reaction, a grimace that lingered. The crew watched in stunned silence as I let the scene unfold naturally. My performance held drama in the spaces between the punches, and audiences still talk about that raw realism. He was the only one who could do that to me, teach me to wear my scars. By the time Sudden Impact rolled into production in 1983, I was a wary director haunted by my own macho image. The notorious "Go ahead, make my day" scene had become a cultural catchphrase, and I feared playing Dirty Harry again might feel hollow. Late one night, Redford called from his office at American Zoetrope. He said, "Don't treat that line as a punchline. Treat it as a confession." He urged me to lean into Harry's loneliness and moral isolation, to let a single quaver creep into my voice before the classic line. When we shot it at dawn on the empty San Francisco street, I tried his variation, eyes hollowed, muscles coiled, voice just a shade softer. The extra beat before, "Make my day," transformed the moment. It became a question, a challenge, a crack in a man's armor. Critics hailed the scene as a career-defining reinvention, and I knew it was Robert's gift that made it possible. Our collaboration deepened in 1988 during Bird, my musical biopic of Charlie Parker. Robin Williams and Forrest Whitaker filled the set with tension and improvisation, but I feared my own lack of musical fluency would betray the soul of jazz. Redford slipped in on the next morning's rehearsal, carrying a battered alto saxophone he'd borrowed from the Sundance Institute's archive. He handed it to me and said, "Play it like Parker is watching." My awkward notes rang off the studio walls, but Robert encouraged me to feel rather than perform, to let every breath and slide be a testament to struggle. His presence freed me to stand beside the musicians with humility. In the final cut, I appear not as a polished director, but as a student of Parker's language. Film historians still cite that choice as the moment that elevated Bird from a biopic into a living, breathing homage to musical genius. Even in the mid-1990s, when I launched my TV series Rawhide reboot, Redford's counsel echoed in my decisions. One episode demanded a sweeping two-horizon tracking shot across a Kansas plain, expensive and risky. The producers balked, worried it would slow pacing and inflate budgets. I called Robert, expecting him to side with caution. Instead, he said, "Go wide. Let the land speak. Sometimes a horizon pressurizes your story more than a close-up." I insisted on the tracking camera, capturing the cattle drive in a single, unbroken sweep. The visual drew both acclaim and envy, convincing everyone that Western still had room for grand, silent beauty. He was the only one who could do that to me, emboldened me to trust scope over speed. In the early 2000s, as I approached my 70s, I confronted the question of legacy. Should I retire or keep challenging myself? Robert's final intervention came on my doorstep at dusk, clad in a turtleneck and jeans, clutching a single Polaroid of us from the Bridges Press tour. He said, "Look at us there. Two men caught between roles and reality. That moment speaks of everything we've shared." Then he paused. "Don't shrink from the next role just because time has passed. Fill that space with everything you've learned." He slipped the Polaroid into my hand and left into the fading light. That photo still sits on my mantel, his quiet challenge pressed between our smiling faces. At 95, I carry his lessons with me into every frame, every drawing of a breath, every moment of hesitation before a scene. Robert Redford was the only one who could do that to me. Break through my defenses, expose my fear, and guide me toward truth in art. And as long as I live, I will speak his influence into every heartbeat of cinema I'm privileged to shape. In the mid-1980s, as I was redefining myself beyond the Western frontier, Robert Redford's quiet counsel resurfaced in my mind when I took on White Hunter Black Heart. That film, exploring obsession and moral compromise, demanded I expose Chandler's darker impulses. Not just another stoic hero. On the first day of shooting in a steamy African savanna, I struggled to convey Chandler's internal turmoil. My performance felt too composed, as if I were simply gliding across set rather than wrestling with conscience. During lunch, Redford covertly drove into base camp, carrying a small brass compass. He handed it to me and said, "Find true north in every scene, even if it leads you into conflict." He walked off before I could thank him. That afternoon, I incorporated the compass into Chandler's pocket and let my eyes flicker toward it during critical moments. Suddenly, the character's moral crosswinds became audible through my gaze. Critics later hailed White Hunter as one of my most nuanced roles, unaware that the compass and Robert's challenge had recalibrated my performance. A decade later, as I prepared to direct and star in Unforgiven, I faced a new dilemma: how to evoke flatland brutality without glorifying violence. The script called for men to become killers out of necessity and regret, but my instinct was to protect the myth of the cowboy. One crisp morning in Edmonton, where we were staging Logan's scene before the prison guardhouse, I felt Logan's petrified restraint needed something more. Standing by the gates, I replayed Robert's words from our Bridges shoot, "Let your heroes crack a little." I dialed his number on a crackling set phone. He answered on the first ring and said simply, "Real strength is knowing when to break." I thanked him and hung up. On the next take, I allowed Logan's lips to tremble as he loaded his gun, an imperceptible quiver that hinted at guilt. The result was a character both formidable and tragic. Unforgiven won the Oscar for Best Picture, and Gene Siskel remarked that Logan's humanity shone through his eyes, shadows cast by Robert's influence. During the early 2000s, when I shifted into the realm of elder statesman roles, Million Dollar Baby being the pinnacle, I discovered I still needed Redford's perspective to mine deeper truth. Playing Frankie Dunn, a hardened trainer wrestling with fatherly instincts, required eclipsing my tough guy persona. The day I shot the scene in Maggie Fitzgerald's rundown gym, I hesitated to let Dunn's protective tenderness show. I feared the moment would feel sentimental rather than earned. That night, I received a text from Robert. "Love is the toughest fight of all." The next morning, I approached that scene braced for dogged reluctance and let my face soften in Frankie's first thawing smile. The chemistry between Dunn and Maggie emerged organically. Millions wept in theaters that year. When I accepted the Oscar, I dedicated it to "Those who fight hardest for love," a line born from Robert's text delivered in my acceptance speech. Off camera, Robert's influence guided my humanitarian efforts. In 2005, I co-founded a Veterans Assistance Foundation, drawing on Robert's counsel in blending star power with grassroots action. He hosted me in Utah at Sundance's backlot, gathering refugees and auctioneers around a campfire to hash out models for delivering aid. He urged me to build programs that paired counseling with vocational training. "Give men a purpose beyond the uniform," he said. That blueprint launched my foundation's first job placement program for returning soldiers. Watching graduates now rebuild lives underlines Robert's gift to turn private conviction into public service, teaching me that art and activism share a mission to elevate human potential. In 2010, as I contemplated retirement from directing, I faced the weight of my own legacy. Would I go quietly into golden sunsets, or push for one final project that could stand beside my best work? I called Robert at his Colorado ranch. He answered with characteristic warmth. "You've still got untold story to tell," he said. He described his own experience helming the Screen Actors Guild's activist wing, where he challenged fellow artists to advocate for climate action. His example reminded me that creativity thrives on purpose, not comfort. 2 weeks later, I greenlit Jersey Boys, stepping behind the camera again. That film, charting the rough edges of musical ambition, became my highest-grossing directorial release in years. Robert's words had nudged me to embrace risk over retreat. As the whirlwind of events began to calm, I found myself drawn back to Robert's enduring lesson about silence. During the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, I set up a live-streamed reading of letters collected for my memoir. Midway through, my voice cracked over a passage about loss. Rather than cut, I paused for 10 heated seconds, letting viewers feel the weight of my grief. Then I continued, my tone steadied by the quiet interval. Afterwards, dozens of fans wrote that the silence between my words saved them in their own darkest hours. That moment reminded me of Redford's watchful gaze in the cutting room, the knowledge that silence, properly placed, carries truth more fully than any flourish. Now, at 95, I sit beside my fireplace, Robert's brass compass, a gift all those years ago, resting on the mantel. It reminds me daily whenever I step into shadow I must find my true north. His insight helped me traverse roles spanning westerns, crime dramas, moral parables, and human stories that defined my career. Robert Redford was the only man who could compel me to break open, to expose my vulnerabilities, and to say whatever it took to speak truth through cinema. And as long as I draw breath, I will honor that debt by continuing to craft moments that let the camera and my own heart breathe. In the spring of 2011, as I approached my 86th birthday, I found myself grappling with the weight of history, decades of roles, awards, and the unspoken echoes of Robert's influence. That year, I accepted a Lifetime Achievement honor at the Berlin Film Festival. Standing on that grand stage before an international audience, I felt the same hush Robert had once taught me to trust the silence before a line holds more promise than any page of dialogue. When I stepped to the microphone, I spoke not of my own legacy, but of the man who first challenged me to crack my facade. This honor, I said, belongs equally to Robert Redford, who looked past my mask and showed me the power of quiet truth. The applause that followed felt less like celebration of my past than a tribute to the spark he ignited in me so long ago. Later that year, I revisited the rugged terrain of Monument Valley for the first time since shooting for a few dollars more. The red sandstone messes rose like silent sentinels under the sky, unchanged by time or rivalry. I walked those dusty paths alone, carrying a single Polaroid that Robert had shot of me, squinting into the sun, 6-gun, drawn, mustache in wind. I pressed the photo against my heart and remembered his words about stillness and scope. Alone beneath those towering butts, I felt that same awe, an actor's dream cast in stone. I sat and left the Polaroid with a prayer, gratitude to the man who taught me to honor every landscape, both external and internal. In 2013, I undertook a short film project for charity, collaborating with young filmmakers who had never known the Old West as I did. I found myself slipping into the role of mentor, the same role Robert once played for me. I guided them through framing shots that caught the sun's edge behind a hillside, coaching actors to hold their breath before a dramatic reveal. Whenever I felt tempted to instruct them with the blunt swagger of my youth, I paused to remember Robert's counsel: let the camera breathe. That reminder kept me from overshadowing their emerging voices, and the final film, screened at a local fundraiser, won praise for its fresh energy and reverent nods to classic Western aesthetics. In teaching others, I honored Robert's approach to collaboration, lighting younger talents rather than eclipsing them. By 2015, I faced my own mortality more directly than ever. Arthritis crept into my hands, and long days on sets became taxing. I contemplated stepping back entirely, but then I received an invitation from Sundance to host a retrospective screening of my best directorial work. I hesitated until I remembered Robert's persistent encouragement to adapt, not retreat. I accepted, arriving at the Eccles Theater in Park City under crisp mountain air. Before the lights dimmed, I took the stage and spoke of Robert's influence, how he'd challenged me to find emotional truth in every frame. Then I introduced those films, encouraging viewers to watch not only for the story but for the silent beats that carried meaning. The audience rose in applause, grateful for insight rather than nostalgia. Proof that Robert's lessons still resonated in every frame I'd ever directed. In 2017, I joined forces with Robert's Sundance Institute to create a fellowship awarding grants to veteran filmmakers exploring themes of moral ambiguity. Together, we reviewed proposals from around the world: gritty drama set in conflict zones, contemplative documentaries on aging, experimental films exploring memory's fragility. I drew on Robert's ethos: seek authenticity, embrace risk, let silence speak. When asked to give final remarks, I quoted Robert's own dictum: art must challenge its maker. That fellowship funded dozens of films, some of which won festival awards and brought new voices to the global stage. In partnering with Robert's legacy, I honored not only his vision but the shared conviction that creativity thrives on courage. The world turned again, and in 2019, I celebrated my 57th anniversary as an actor with a televised tribute. Producers assembled montages of my standoffs and my directorial triumphs, but I insisted on including clips of Robert, his Sundance intros, his quiet cameo in a '94 crime drama, paired with my own performances. During the live broadcast, I spoke directly into the camera. If Clint Eastwood learned anything, it was from those who dared him to be more than himself. Robert Redford was that man. The network virtually trended overnight, and viewers reached out with stories of how that confession moved them to revisit Robert's own work. That shared moment of candor became my most viewed interview in decades, a testament to the enduring power of honest tribute. As 2020 brought global upheaval, I turned once more to Robert's principles. During lockdown, I recorded a series of reflective monologues called Empty Landscapes, sharing personal memories, reading passages from Western poets, and offering thoughts on resilience. My daughter streamed them on her website and reported tears from fans confined across continents. One viewer wrote, "Your quiet words felt like dawn after a long night. I knew those moments of stillness, silence before a whisper. Owed everything to Robert's early guidance in a dusty European editing bay. Now at 95, I keep Robert's brass compass on my writing desk, alongside that battered notebook he once carried. Each morning I turn it slowly, choosing a word he underlined: courage, truth, silence, and set a daily intention. As an elder statesman of cinema, I share that ritual with young collaborators, passing on the compass as a symbol of his influence. Because in a lifetime of roles and directorial projects, the beacon that guided me most clearly was Robert Redford. And the singular gift he gave me permission to stand open, let the camera breathe, and speak the unscripted truth. In 2021, at age 91, I accepted an invitation to curate a Centennial Robert Redford retrospective at the Academy Museum in Los Angeles. They asked me to select 10 films, past and present, that best embodied his legacy. I pored over titles from the candidate to A River Runs Through It, but I chose to open with clips from his first Western, The Cheyenne Social Club, where Redford's easy smile masks a restless heart, and close with his final directorial effort, The Old Man and the Gun, underscoring how he captured gentleness beneath a rugged surface. At the opening gala, I delivered a short address. Robert showed me that kindness can be the greatest form of courage. These films speak not just to the era they depict, but to the enduring strength of compassion. The crowd rose in applause, affirming that his influence remains vital, and that in curating his work I continued the dialogue he began. Shortly thereafter, I was asked to lend my voice to a documentary on Redford's environmental activism. I recorded reflections on his founding of the Sundance Institute's ecological wing, drawing parallels to my own commitment to conservation in Carmel. I spoke of evenings he'd spent showing me maps of threatened wetlands, of how he urged me to plant trees on my ranch, not for trophies, but as living monuments. My narration wove personal anecdotes, long drives along the Russian River, dusting seedlings, our shared awe at redwood giants, demonstrating how his passion inspired my own stewardship. When the film aired, younger viewers reached out online, saying his environmental message felt urgent and hopeful. Robert had always believed that film could spur real-world action, and it proved true. In 2022, on the eve of my 92nd birthday, I launched an annual mentorship fund through the Directors Guild, named the Redford Eastwood Fellowship, to support veteran filmmakers transitioning into new media. I insisted that each fellow attend a one-week residency at Sundance, where Redford's spirit still echoes in the Silent Pines, and meet with me in Carmel to workshop their first short project. I offered notes, not as a formal critique, but as a friend urging honesty and risk. The inaugural cohort produced documentaries on veterans' mental health and a VR project exploring climate change. Watching their work, I felt Robert's hand guiding me to nurture those next voices, ensuring his ethos of authenticity continues beyond his own filmography. When my longtime cinematographer asked for one final on-screen collaboration, we chose to film a simple conversation between Robert's favorite golden, hour light, and my own weathered face, speaking off the cuff about memory's shifting frame. Under the redwoods of Carmel Valley, the camera rolled as I recounted our last meeting. Robert's quiet thumbprint on my compass, the note he tucked in my jacket urging me to speak truth into the dusk. We captured the hush between our words, his presence palpable though absent, reminding me that silence is a canvas for emotion. That footage now opens a short called Echoes of Redford, shared with young film students at workshops I host every fall. I also honored him by donating his original folding chair, the one he placed center stage in my Madison Square Garden concert, to the Academy Archive. It sits there today, alongside my editing console from Sudden Impact and my director's chair from Unforgiven. Visitors handle it with reverence, run their fingers over scuffs and blood-red seat stains, marveling that a simple prop could unlock moments of raw honesty on film. In my dedication plaque I wrote, "May this chair remind all who sit here that sometimes the greatest direction comes from total stillness." This past summer, I flew back east for a private luncheon with a small circle of Michelle and Robert's closest collaborators, editors, cinematographers, and costume designers. Instead of wine or champagne, we toasted with water from the Colorado River, whose banks Robert spent years fighting to preserve. We shared stories of nights spent mapping out storyboards under oil lamps, of sudden jabs of insight he delivered during midnight shoots. I told them that at 95, I still carry his notebook pages in my jacket pocket, small squares of scrap paper where he once jotted, "Find the line that trembles." Those scraps have become both talismans and guiding lights for my final creative chapters. Now, as I approach my 96th birthday, I find the same compass on my desk pointing me toward true north. I continue to speak at festivals, coach young directors, and record voiceovers for documentaries, all with one thought echoing in my mind: Robert was the only one who could make me break open on camera, reveal my unspoken truth, and embrace vulnerability as strength. Tonight, when I close my eyes in the quiet glow of my Carmel lanterns, I whisper one last confession: the legacy Robert Redford left me is more precious than any accolade or role. The gift of trusting silence, of speaking truth, and of living with the same courage he carried across every frame of film. His influence remains the guiding star of my creative journey, and I am forever grateful. In the quiet that follows my daily walks along the Carmel cliffs, I feel Robert's presence as clearly as the Pacific mist on my skin. Now, at 95, I've come to understand that the greatest frame isn't a widescreen vista, but the final moments we share with those who shape our vision. In my studio, I mounted Robert's handwritten note on a corkboard. Courage lives in every cut, and I study it each morning before reviewing footage. That simple phrase guides the edits I make on my latest short film, a final exploration of solitude and human connection. Every trimmed second, every lingering pause bears his mark. He was the only one who could show me that truth often rides in the spaces between our words. Last autumn, I hosted a small gathering of young directors in my Monterey Bay theater, inviting them to screen Robert's debut film alongside my own. I encouraged feedback sessions in which honesty was the currency. As I listened to their reactions, tears at his tender moments, laughter at his understated wit, I recalled Robert slipping notes under my door decades ago, pushing me to acknowledge vulnerability on screen. I shared those notes with the group and said, "Let humility be your greatest tool." Their eyes widened as they traced his words against the glowing screen, and I felt Robert's spirit passing from one generation to the next. In 2022, I worked with a virtual reality team to craft an immersive experience set in a western ghost town at sunset. They programmed silhouettes of Robert's favorite characters drifting through saloon doors, and I supplied audio excerpts from our conversations, his soft admonitions to feel the rhythm of dawn, woven beneath the VR soundscape. Users stepped into that world and described palpable awe as they watched sunset rays carve dust motes in midair. They spoke of being moved not by spectacle, but by the sense that a patient observer, like Robert, had sculpted every beam of light. That project reminded me that art transcends medium, and that his guidance still shapes creative frontiers I never imagined exploring. On the philanthropic front, the Redford Eastwood Fellowship announced its 10th anniversary this year. I flew to Park City to present the latest cohort with awards, each filmmaker intent on probing social issues, from climate justice to indigenous rights. Through narrative cinema, watching them discuss Robert's ethos of nurturing truth compelled me to reflect on our first encounter backstage all those decades ago. I spoke to the assembly about how a single gesture, a whispered insight, a shared compass, can unlock fresh vision. In that room under the stars and mountains Robert loved, I saw his legacy carried forward in every eager storyteller ready to risk their comfort for honest art. Back home in Carmel, I maintain a small archive of Robert's personal artifacts, the compass he gifted me, faded Polaroids of our first afternoon edit sessions, and a well-worn typewriter ribbon he once borrowed. I open that archive when the world feels too loud, and I sit before the mantel where his photograph stands beside mine. I clasp my hands and say aloud, "Thank you." Those long, faded edges of memory hold more vitality now than any golden celluloid, proof that the intangible gifts he bestowed endure in my own creative heart. As I contemplate my final curtain call, I often walk our old shared paths, through stately redwoods or down sunlit boardwalks. I speak into the winding breeze, "Robert, this one's for you." Then I allow the camera in my mind to record not a staged moment, but the authentic tremor of my voice as it rises in a practiced pitch. That tremble, I know, carries the highest truth, a vulnerability he taught me to embrace, a strength he coaxed from my silence. Tonight, I set aside the compass and typewriter ribbon and lean back in my recliner. The studio lights are off, but a single lamp casts a pool of warmth where I sit. I close my eyes and hear Robert's calm drawl, reminding me of the power in stillness. At 95, Clint Eastwood finally speaks up about Robert Redford, and in these final frames of my journey, I honor the only man who could break me open, challenge me to seek deeper truth, and light my path toward every nuanced performance and every unspoken moment I dared to share.